Welcome to Speaking of Love, the podcast, and I am your host, Latoya. I created this podcast in honor of my dad, who was an amazing guy. He had an infectious laugh, and his spirit was magnetic. He was the type of guy who made everybody feel like somebody special. If you were to place him in a crowded room of 100 people, my dad would be the smartest person in the entire room. He was an award-winning radio TV broadcast engineer for many years. Born and raised in the city of Detroit, he was one of the first to go to college in his family. And while attending Wayne State University, he developed a lifelong love affair with the game of basketball. He was the shortest point guard on the team, but he could slam dunk the basketball with either hand. By all outward appearances, my dad lived a rewarding life, but there were parts of him that were known to only him. On March 2nd of 2020, my dad's private struggles became public when he took his own life in a murder-suicide. When he died, a part of me died too. And since the tragedy, I have become an advocate for mental health awareness and suicide prevention. I also created this beautiful podcast in honor of my dad and others like him who are struggling with the effects of mental health challenges. My podcast, Speaking of Love, is named after a show my dad once hosted called Speaking of Sports. Thank you for taking the time to be here with me today as we take a journey in pursuit of the strongest magnetic force on the planet Earth, and that's love. Love is the strongest magnetic force in the universe. Each time we choose love, we enjoy life more. Each time we choose love, we enhance the quality of our life. Each time we choose love, life seems brighter and clearer. Love heals. Love soothes. Love elevates. Love forgives. Love gives us hope. Love brings us joy and abundance. Love makes us grow. Love feels good. Love makes life colorful. We are all here to learn about love, to love yourself more, and therefore others. Real love is selfless and free from fear. It's joy in the pain. Love more. Love is the thing that makes all things beautiful. Speaking of love,
what an incredible way to honor her father and help others heal from the loss of a loved one due to suicide.
my name is Latoya Bond, and I have a podcast called Speaking of Love. My podcast is dedicated to the memory of my dad who took his own life in a murder-suicide. Aside from that, I am a business owner. I have a home-based business. I am also a legal professional during my 9-to-5 day. And I am a person who operates her entire life on the premise of spreading love. It's the secret to my success. It's the secret to my longevity on this earth, and it's what keeps us going because love is the thing that makes all things beautiful. So that's why I'm here today to talk about my favorite subject in the whole wide world, and that's love. Hello, everyone. How are you? I missed you all so much. My name is Latoya, and I am the host of this podcast, Speaking of love, today I have a beautiful young lady here all the way from Philadelphia. Her name is Marie, and I'm super excited to have her here. She and I have been working very diligently to bring to you today some very important information regarding the subject of murder suicide. This may be triggering for some of you, so please, if at any point this becomes overbearing to listen to and you're not able to continue with us, take a break, walk away, and come back later if you need to do so. I want to definitely make sure that you know that this is a safe place for you, and we're here to help you and provide information. So, thank you for being here today. This is episode number 143. I've been doing this a long time, and every episode has been very meaningful to me. I want to introduce you to Marie. She's from the Philadelphia area. She's a childhood survivor of a murder suicide loss. She participates in peer led murder suicide loss support group. Her family loss occurred 38 years ago. Professionally, she's in graduate school for counseling psychology, working on her degree, specializing in trauma studies. Welcome, Marie. How are you today?
I'm good, Latoya. Thank you so much for having me here and for creating this space.
Thank you, Marie, for being here. For those of you who don't know, Marie and I, we both belong to an organization called the Murder Suicide Network. And I met her. We've been working together. We have our group-led meetings, and we've established a relationship. And I've decided to let her be here today as a safe place to talk, to educate, to inform, but to most of all, share her journey of love. And I appreciate you for being here, Marie.
Thank you for having me, Latoya.
Thank you. So, we're going to go right into the interview today. I want to talk to you about your early years, Marie. When you were growing up as a young girl, what was life like for you?
The easiest answer is turbulent, but so it was kind of fragmented, and I have kind of some holes in my memories along the way. So until I was 10, it was very turbulent. Both of my parents were alcoholics. And it was my dad was engaged in domestic violence near the end. So when I was 5, my mom left my father, and they had a separation and divorce. And there was a space of about 3 years where I have 2 younger brothers, David and Michael, where we were kind of moving around, sometimes living with grandparents, sometimes with our mom, sometimes with our dad, sometimes together, sometimes apart. And so this kind of all culminated when I was 8. My brother David was 6, and my brother Michael was 5, with the murder-suicide event in our family, where my dad murdered my brother David and then commit suicide himself. And then I will say it was still turbulent for a time afterwards, because my mom was a recovering alcoholic, and she needed some psychiatric treatment as a result of her complicated grief. But around the time that I was 10 years old, we started to kind of stabilize as our remaining family, my mom and my brother Michael and I, and started to engage in like support groups and counseling and that sort of thing.
So, how did this loss touch your life? How has it impacted you, Marie?
I guess the impacts have been profound. It occurred when I was a child, so it was kind of like foundational. I think that it's necessitated like a lot of healing over time. And I think it's given me a unique perspective, perhaps, and like, where people are struggling, I tend to easily be able to reach empathy or non-judgmental space holding, because I know what it's like to go through just to struggle and to have life events occur.
Mm-hmm. So you have dedicated your life to you belong to an organization. Tell me about that organization and what the effects are and what the goal is for that organization.
Right. That's the organization that we're both a part of. It's the Murder Suicide Loss Network, and the website is mslnetwork.org. I'd actually, because this event is so, old now at this point, this year will be 38 years, I'd looked for a number of years an online support group and was just not able to find one. There was no resource for this kind of peer group for a long time. But so finally, like after 35 years, we found this group, and it's a peer support. So everybody in it, nobody's a practicing clinician or anything. We're all just peer equals relating to each other from our personal experiences. And even though it had been so long since my event, there was really significant healing that came from being involved with being able to talk to other survivors. Contextually, a lot of the stuff that I struggled with became normal. Like other people who have experienced murder, suicide, loss struggled similarly. And that helped me heal in ways that was really profound. So it's a very supportive group.
Yes, I found the group to be very supportive as well. Again, it's the Murder Suicide Network. And I'm going to put the information here for anyone who may be interested in looking into what we're all about. We have peer led support groups that meet, I think it's every 2 weeks. And it's a safe space for people like Marie and I to sit down and discuss our feelings, our anger, our frustration, our love, whatever emotion comes up. It's a safe place for us to bring it. And then not only that, but we're being educated on how to deal with the grief, how to live, how to go forward, how to honor our loved one's memory. So it's been a really, really successful tool in helping in this space because, as you've said, Marie, there are not a lot of resources available for murder, suicide, loss at all.
Yeah, one of the first things that I noticed when I joined the group that was kind of validating for me was it's unfortunately because this type of loss has such a horrible element to it. A lot of us are subject to kind of like a stigma. We feel stigmatized, like we don't feel like we can talk. So it became normal. Other people shared that they felt like they didn't have room to share their experience. And so for us to be able to share it with each other is just very healing and very validating.
You know, I have a little information here about murder suicide. Most people, you hear that term a lot, especially on the news and the media, but a murder suicide is a homicide suicide that occurs when someone kills at least one other person before taking their own life. Murder suicides can cause devastating grief, not only to the ones of the innocent victims, but also to the loved ones of the person who took the other person's life, like myself, my father. So, what is a suicide loss survivor? One might ask. If you are a murder suicide loss survivor, it just means that you've lost someone close to you who killed themselves and one other person before dying by suicide. So it's a very complex subject matter. But what I have learned, Marie, which is really surprising to me, is that most murder suicide victims are female. And there's no national tracking system for murder suicides in the United States. But medical studies do show that and estimate that about 1,500 deaths occur per year in the United States for murder suicide. And the majority of the cases are between spouses or intimate partners. And the vast majority of the perpetrators are male.
That's the statistic that I recall reading too. And just one thought I had was before kind of, I would like to talk about filicide suicide, which is the event of where a parent murders a child and then dies by suicide themselves. But really quickly, I wanted to remark about one of the things that was really validating joining this support group was for many of us, not for all of us, but for many of us, we loved both the murderer and the victim. And that adds a really complicated element to the grief. It's not black and white. It's very nuanced. And the person who commit the murder in many cases was somebody like a parent or a spouse or a brother, that sort of thing. Would this be a good time for me to go into the kind of the stats on the filicide suicide demographic too? Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
So we found that a Chicago study, I'm actually referencing a study that was done in 2005, and I could send that to you for references for notes if you like, but it's called Filicide Suicide, Common Factors in Parents Who Kill Their Children and Themselves. It's by multiple authors. And they referenced that a Chicago study found that while filicides are only 2% of all homicides, they represent about 7.5% of murder-suicides. So even in the murder-suicide demographic, which is small, filicide suicides are much smaller. They're more rare. And so what they found was that common factors, there's a book that we pass around in our group, or we've talked about, called The Perversion of Virtue by Thomas Joyner. And it kind of talks about how a lot of the contributing factors to an event like this are often what's seen is kind of like altruism gone skewed, like it's good intentions, like mercy, but then it goes wrong. And so they call it the perversion of virtue. And they find that that's also the case in filicide suicides too. Like parents are often struggling themselves, and it might seem as a form of mercy, as an unfortunate form of mercy. So what they found, but they referenced and I would like to share this because I'm going into the field of mental health, kind of like we do a suicidal ideology assessment with people that we work with. For clinicians, they recommend that if you're working with a parent who is expressing suicidal ideation, who also has depressive features, especially if they're experiencing psychosis, is to ask them how they imagine their children will survive after they die by suicide, if they choose that. Assess for kind of like what they call overlove, which could get into that perversion of virtue, and ask them if they ever have any fears of harming their children. Kind of like you ask direct questions when you're talking to somebody with suicidal ideation, you also want to ask direct questions in this case and try not to shy away. As difficult as it is, yeah. And that would be a good prevention tool.
And also it opens up the door for the conversation to be had, because a lot of times when people have those suicidal thoughts and they're thinking of harming themselves or others, it can be very isolating. So just asking the question relieves the burden of pressure off the person who's considering this.
Isolation is a really big contributing factor to these types of events. Yeah.
Yes, it is. Marie, while we're on the subject of this, I know that we just talked about speaking with someone who may be thinking of this, but I want to add some information here. I want to talk to you all. Let me remove your photo for a second here and the podcast logo, because I want to talk to you guys. At some point in your life, you may encounter someone who's actually contemplating suicide or harming themselves or harming others. And we don't want to push that person further away. So I want to talk to you all today about what not to say to someone who may be contemplating taking their own life. And so here, one of the things that we want to share with you all, I'm going to go through these really quickly. Okay, so if someone is thinking of taking their own life, you don't want to say this to them. You don't mean that. You don't really want to die. No, you don't. You don't really want to die. You're just saying that. We're coming from a place of protecting them when this statement is made, because we don't want them to die and we don't want them to really mean that. But the person who's making this statement, who's feeling this way, they really do want to die. They really mean what they're saying. So don't try to convince them that what they're feeling is not real. That's the point I want to make. Another thing we shouldn't say to the person is, your life is not that bad. Ugh, what you're going through, that's nothing. Who are we to say how their life feels? This would not be the best way to help someone by telling them that you're invalidating their feelings in that moment. And you don't want to do that, because that could push them even further away from you. Another one that we should stay away from is, other people have problems worse than you and they don't want to die. Other people have gone through this and they didn't die. Why do you want to die? Again, we want to stay away from judging them, comparing them. This seems like you're comparing them to someone else's situation. We want to stay away from that. Another one is looking at the person and saying, wow, you have so much to live for. Why would you want to die? Again, in the mind of a suicidal person, they don't have much to live for anymore. So we're talking from a healthy brain, from a healthy perspective in the mind. But when someone is contemplating suicide, they're not in a healthy mental space. So you can't rationalize with them in that way. So avoid those kind of statements as well. Here's another judgment statement. Suicide is cowardly. So think about this. You already feel depressed. You're feeling sad. You want to die. And here you reveal to someone close to you that you're thinking of suicide, and they basically just called you a coward. How would that make you feel? It would push you further away from that person. And what we want to do when people are contemplating suicide is we want to draw them closer to us. And I like to use my hands when I say this.
Mm-hmm.
You want to draw them closer to you and not push them further away. So our statements and the way that we speak to them can either bring them closer or push them further away. So we have to be careful. And suicide is not cowardly at all.
Mm-hmm.
People who commit the act of suicide, they're dealing with something psychological. It's not cowardly.
Mm-hmm.
Another statement is trying to convince the person again that what they're feeling is not real. If you ask them the question, what about the people you'll leave behind? How could you think of hurting them? Well, the person who's contemplating suicide, again, they're not thinking rationally about all of their loved ones that they would leave behind and how it would have impacted them. So don't ask that question in that moment. Or here's another judgment statement people often say, oh, you just want attention. You're not going to really kill yourself. You just want attention. Don't do that. Even if you feel that that person wants attention, give it to them in a positive way. The way you give them attention, if you really feel the person is doing this just for attention, you can give them attention by lowering your voice, coming closer to them, touching them on the arm and saying, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what you're going through. Instead of standing back to them and saying, you just want attention.
Mm-hmm.
Which one do you think will have the most impact? The soft love or the harsh criticism? You see what I mean? So these are just some things that we would want to avoid. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Well, again, in the mind of someone who's suicidal, they don't see the bigger picture like we see the bigger picture. So these are just a few things that I wanted to share with you all, a few words to avoid, a few phrases to avoid if someone reveals to you that they are contemplating suicide. If they are, the one thing that you want to do is talk to them and guide them to help. The best thing to do is dial 988. Just like you would call 911 in a medical emergency or a police situation, we now have a line established to help people who are feeling suicidal. And that number is 988. It's the Suicide Lifeline number. I have it posted here. Guide them to this number and get them the help that they so desperately deserve and need. Right, Marie?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, Marie, go ahead.
I've worked some for a space. I worked on a warm line, which is an emotional support phone line, and we would do suicidal assessments when we talk to people. And so we were trained to lean in instead of away and to ask very clarifying, not vague questions. So asking somebody something like, do you think you might hurt yourself, is actually fairly vague. And it's not constructive to that kind of situation. So there's also, they talk about like a range of suicidal ideation, like where one end might be like, some people express feeling like they want to die by suicide, and they are more expressing it, they feel overwhelmed and they don't actually have a specific intent. Whereas at the other end of the range is they're feeling overwhelmed, they figured out how they're going to do it, and they absolutely have a plan. And so you want to engage with them and ask very specific questions, and you want to be direct and not vague. You can say, are you thinking of committing suicide? Are you thinking of killing yourself? And if they say, depending on how they answer, I've asked people that question, and more than once people say, oh, no, I'm just really depressed or something like that. So that can kind of guide you into figuring out how severe they are on that spectrum, like where they are with things. And if they say yes, if they already have a plan and if they already have a means, which is a method, then that's a really alarming situation. You definitely want to get some sort of crisis intervention involved, which there are county-based crisis interventions for that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. You definitely don't want to beat around the bush in a situation like this. You want to be direct. And like you said, Marie, ask the question directly. And I would rather be wrong than not wrong, so to speak. I'd rather ask the question and get it out there because I wouldn't want to lose someone knowing that I could have possibly helped them. So there's nothing wrong with that. And what I've learned in helping people who are suicidal is that they appreciate that, because having that inside of you and someone coming along to open up the door to talk about it, it relieves like a weight of pressure off of them. So you're doing a very good thing by asking them directly. Are you
Like, it
thinking?
relieves the pressure from them or them having to struggle with saying it directly. You've directly asked for them. It frees them up. Yeah.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does, Marie. So, Marie, I want to add another element here. I'm going to talk just very briefly about some of the warning signs for suicide. Okay. The first thing that people do is they withdraw or they isolate themselves. This may be difficult to spot if you do not live with the person with whom you suspect may be struggling, but often people struggle behind closed doors. So if you notice that your loved one is withdrawing or isolating and not participating in things that they would normally do, it could be that something's going on. Sleeping a little too much or maybe a little less. A change in their sleep habits could be a symptom of depression or contemplating suicide. Feelings of hopelessness. This is a common symptom according to psychologists. So keep in mind when you're having conversations with a loved one and friend, if you suspect that they could be hopeless or just not being themselves, dive a little deeper into finding out what that's about. The next point is being easily agitated. If you notice that your loved one is just always on the edge and they're not as nice as they used to be, every little thing just kind of ticks them off, that could be a cause for you to reach out a little more for them. Acting anxious. Being anxious and nervous is a warning sign most people would not normally think of. I know with COVID-19 being anxious and getting sick and losing your job and things like that, people were contemplating a lot of worries and things of that nature. So being anxious is one of them. Another big one is increased drugs or alcohol, drinking more, smoking more marijuana, indulging in reckless behavior, things of that nature. So just know that there are so many things that we could possibly miss. But if we just hone in on our loved ones and pay attention to these things and just sit down and be a safe space for that individual to come to for help.
There's two others, if you don't mind me throwing in, that I thought of while looking at those. One is if somebody who's been depressed for a long time suddenly and inexplicably seems okay and happy, that can actually be a warning sign because they may have decided that they're going to die by suicide and they have a plan and they're just, maybe it's a few days out, but that relieves a burden for them. So that's actually a warning sign too. And then somebody without it doesn't giving away their possessions is also another warning sign.
Giving away prized possessions. My father he graduated from Wayne State University in 1975 with a degree in radio, TV broadcasting, mass communications. And he had a really nice class ring with the television antennas embedded inside the stone. And he actually pawn that ring at one time in his life. So giving away prized possessions is definitely something to cause alarm. So Marie, what do you love most about the work that you're doing right now, serving humanity? What do you love most about this work?
It's been a journey for me and my family to arrive at healing and to make sense of this event that happened in our family. And so me going into school and wanting to serve in the mental health field is me ultimately wanting to make meaning of what our family event and giving back to others and helping prevent that sort of occurrence for others. So there's a Holocaust survivor and psychotherapist named Viktor Frankl, who's got logotherapy, and it's the philosophy is meaning making as being an important virtue and kind of life affirming thing to seek out in life. And so for me, it's very meaningful to take any lessons or healing that I've gained over the years and in addition to education and training, be able to give that back to others.
That's so beautiful. I just love I love it. I really do. What is the biggest lesson you've learned about yourself since starting this important work?
About myself personally, I guess. Well, I guess there's maybe when I was younger, there was like a more of like a naive thought that anyone who works in this type of, in mental health and social services, doing like what you're doing, raising awareness and opening this conversational space. When I was younger, I guess I had this idea that they are like all put together and completely healthy or something along those lines. And not saying that I haven't achieved growth and healing myself, but what I'm realizing is that the helpers are people who are just willing to show up. They still struggle themselves. They still have their own work to do, but they show up. And I feel like that's just me joining that community is what I've learned about myself, is that I can show up and I can be a constructive help. And regardless of, still needing to attend that counseling and that sort of thing in the peer group myself. So.
And the fact that we have this lived experience, Marie, makes us better qualified, so to speak, to help other individuals who are facing those crises because we've lived and we've gone through it.
I think it does foster a type of empathy and understanding, and even like an ability to approach somebody in a difficult situation and almost like sit down with them and meet them where they're at, and just kind of accept that space and say, okay, like what can we do?
So Marie, if someone is watching this podcast right now or listening in and they're having thoughts of suicide, they're tired, the world is just crumbling in front of them, they don't want to live anymore, they've had enough, what words of encouragement would you give to that individual who's feeling suicidal?
There's a lot to that question. Thank you for posing it. I have a few thoughts on it. One is, I've heard the phrase, actually my counselor suggested this to me, that suicide is a very permanent solution to what could be a temporary problem. So I'm not wanting to invalidate how difficult somebody, like the emotional experience of somebody who is at that point and they're considering suicide. I've actually been there twice in my life myself. And I know how painful that is, and it feels absolutely hopeless. But it is a permanent solution. So you could potentially move through that, and you could experience healing and joy again, even with time. Another thought that I have, one thing that I noticed a lot in the work that I did on the emotional support warm line when we did suicide assessments with people, is most people, or a lot of people, when they're at that point, are in a state of isolation, whether even if they're surrounded by people, but they don't feel like they are understood or heard, or they're actually just very alone. So I would say definitely like seek out your helps, mental health helps, crisis counseling. But what really helped me ultimately when I was the second time I felt suicidal ideation myself was seeking out friendship and community. And just really leaning into the people you encounter who are good listeners, who are empathetic, who offer you support, and they can be your lifeline, and they can kind of help encourage and support you, and to be able to move past that and experience healing. Just some thoughts.
Thank you, Marie. I am so glad you mentioned that. I want to share my screen here on the subject of speaking with people and just sharing with a community of people who can help you. We, Marie and I, as we mentioned earlier, we both belong to the Murder Suicide Loss Network. I'm going to enlarge this here 1 second. So if you would like to connect with our organization, the website is msinetwork.org. Is that correct?
mslnetwork.org.
mslnetwork.org. Okay, one moment. Okay, there we are. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so this is the Murder Suicide Loss Network. and they have valuable resources to help individuals who have lost loved ones in a murder suicide. It indicates here that there's a support for life's journey after murder suicide loss. Welcome. We are sorry you have come looking, but we're glad that you found us. We are the first and only nonprofit postvention community for survivors of murder suicide loss events. Our mission is to provide for MSL survivors to help them grieve, cope, and heal. And they've been providing peer-led support for the last 4 years. Again, the website is mslnetwork.org. Please connect with them. If you know someone who is looking for help in that way, in that space, please reach out to them, mslnetwork.org. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you.
So, Marie, we're going to move our interview a little bit further. So, this podcast is called Speaking of Love. I created this podcast in honor of my dad. My dad used to be a radio TV broadcast engineer. And many years ago, he had a radio sports show called Speaking of Sports. So, when he died, I wanted to do something to honor him. I know nothing about sports, but I know all about love. So, his program was called Speaking of Sports, and I created this podcast, Speaking of Love, to honor him. So the $1 million question, Marie, that I ask all of my guests who sit before me is, how do you define love? Speaking of love, Marie, how do you define love?
I have to own that this was the most difficult question that you gave to me in advance. And to normalize experience, I just want to quickly say that demographically, children who grow up in like domestic abuse and violent situations, love can become very complicated concept for them because it becomes normal in their context to have people who say they love them also hurt them or abuse them. So that a lot of people who grow up that way, it becomes a journey or a healing experience to arrive at what true love really is. And so I just want to say that, like, in my experience, having grown that way, with a lot of like really dear friendships, family members. As a parent, I'm a mother, and my experience with loving my children is, I think that, love involves trust and respect. And I think it also involves a lot of perspective taking. I think that in order to really truly love someone, even if you don't agree with them, it really helps to foster the ability to put yourself in their shoes, so to speak, so you can understand their emotional experience and validate and, move through it. But I think that true love is life affirming and life giving.
Life affirming and life giving. Mm-hmm. Yes, because without that, there is no life. I want to show a photo here of my dad. I'll bring it forward here. That's him in his radio station. Speaking of Sports was the name of the show. And he actually won an award for that radio program, Speaking of Sports. And so I've also written a book here, Speaking of Love, which is available on Amazon, a suicide loss survivor's guide of hope, healing, and love. It actually became an international bestseller on Amazon. Within 3 hours of publishing the book, it became a bestseller. So if you're interested in purchasing the book, actually, you know what? I'm doing something different right now. If you're interested, I could send you a PDF copy of the book free of charge. So just, people can email me their email address and I'll send them the PDF copy of the book, because my purpose here, Marie, I'm not here to make money. I don't want to profit off my loss. I just want to help people. And I wasn't able to save my dad, but if I could save just one person's life by doing this, then my mission is fulfilled.
I absolutely understand that, because like I said, I enjoy the meaning-making perspective of like Viktor Frankl's logotherapy. So similar for me wanting to get into this field and do whatever I can in any little way. I really appreciate that you're holding this space and you're creating this podcast. And I just have to say, hats off to you. This is episode 143. The commitment to this is just beautiful. And I'm really thankful that you've created this space.
Thank you, Marie. I went in head first when this first happened. So I used to do it every Saturday morning at 12 o'clock noon, but life has become very busy. I have a small baking business where I make desserts. And then I still work a 9 to 5 job, and I'm a fiance. I have a daughter. So I have a full, complete life. So my podcast is monthly now. I do my podcast once a month, and the impact is still the same. So I don't focus on the numbers. I focus on the quality of love that I'm providing to my audience. So that's what's important to me.
And it's a very loving exercise to go through, to be able to share this with people. So thank you for that. You example love so beautifully.
Thank you. Marie, is there anything else you would like to share with my audience before we conclude the interview today?
I think that's it. Definitely take down this murder-suicide, the suicide lifeline number, the 988, if in case you're struggling or somebody struggling with suicidal ideation. And then if you're a listener who's experienced murder-suicide, it is a smaller demographic, and it can be hard to find support for that. So please check us out at mslnetwork.org. And we're a very supportive and understanding peer group. We'd love to have you join us.
Oh, perfect. Okay. And I have the network listed here in my show notes, mslnetwork.org. Please connect with them. Hopefully at some point, if Mitch is watching, he'll let me join his board. I know I belong to another organization for suicide prevention and awareness, but I don't believe it would be a conflict of interest at all. I am a person who believes that my time on earth should be spent helping, serving, loving. I am a person who doesn't sit down much.
I hear you.
Yes, I have to keep busy. So, and this, it provides a means of purpose after losing a loved one to suicide, and it gives me a greater purpose for living. So I'm going to talk to Mitch about being a part of his board one of these days, because the network is amazing, and I love to be connected with amazing people like yourself, Marie.
Same. Thank you. Mitch is our, I think he's our organizer for the mslnetwork.org. And he's done was he number 140 on your podcast? Because he's done an interview here, right?
I think he was 141.
141. Yeah. So he's actually retired, and this is his life's mission. And he's just so passionate and supportive, and we really appreciate him.
Yes, we are all family now. So, Marie, when the pages of your life are reviewed and your mission here on the planet Earth is complete, what do you most want to be remembered for?
I don't necessarily feel like my name needs to go down in some, historical record or anything like that. But I just simply hope that I've given more to life than I've taken from it. I've given more to people than I just hope to have a positive impact more than anything else. And especially for my children, that's been a lot of my motivation for my healing, was so that my children wouldn't be subject to that kind of like generational trauma as much. But I just hope to have a positive impact.
Wow. Well, I believe that you've already achieved your intention, because you're doing that just right now. Thank
you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. I admire you. I appreciate the work that you're doing. I love people who dedicate their lives to enhancing the lives of other people. And that's exactly what you're doing, Marie. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I bow to your excellence. Thank you.
Mutual. Thank you.
Before we go, Marie, we've had people watching us live on YouTube and Facebook, and they've left some comments. So let's go through and read some of their comments. One moment. Wow, we've got a lot today. So we have my sister-in-law, Keisha Carter. She says, "Hey, sis."
Hi.
And she's giving us the praying hands of love, and she's letting us know that what we're doing is amazing. I just want to say, my fiance's family, they are so supportive in every aspect of life. And I'm just truly grateful to have the love and support of my fiance and his sister. It's just beautiful. And then I have my cousin Tay. She's watching from California. We've got someone from way, way away. She has no idea how cold it is.
It's snowing here.
Yes, snowing here too. Yeah. And then my sister-in-law, Keisha, says, "Hello, Marie."
Hi, Keisha.
And Tay says, congratulations, Marie.
Thank you.
And then my fiance, I don't see his comment, but
Hi.
that's me kissing him on the cheek on I think that's his Facebook cover page.
Oh.
Okay, let's read what my fiance had to say. It says, thank you for the valuable information because this information needs to be taught and shared everywhere because the lack of awareness and knowledge in the communities. So thank you all. You're welcome, sweetheart.
Yeah, thank you.
And we have more comments here. Just people, they were responding to the tone and the comments where we were telling people what not to say. Okay.
Yeah, you want to encourage them in and validate where they are currently.
Yes. So thank you all so much for listening. We have Carmela here. Carmela, I don't remember where she is. I believe she lives down south, but she says congratulations and thank you. And then we have Antoinette Baker. She is the parent of one of my former students. Antoinette Baker and I, we share the same birthday, and her daughter has the same birthday as us too.
Oh, wow.
And it says, I'm so proud of you. Congratulations on everything you've accomplished. My sister-in-law says, thank you for the knowledge and the information. She says, I'm a very busy woman. Positive impact. So, yep, these are the comments from our audience. This podcast episode will live forever on YouTube, on Facebook. In a few minutes, I'm going to upload it to all the podcast platforms. So you'll be able to hear it on Spotify, SoundCloud, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, everywhere. Wherever you choose to listen to your favorite podcast, Speaking of Love is there as well. So thank you all for being here this week. I'll be back next month. In the next few days, I am going away to a 3-day conference for another organization that I belong with called Kevin's Song. We're having the largest suicide conference in the state of Michigan, and I'm going to be doing that later this week. So when I come back next month on the podcast, I'm going to share with you a wealth of information that I'm going to be getting in the space of suicide prevention. So Marie, is there anything else you'd like to say before we go?
I just want to say thank you. Latoya offers a very comfortable and nurturing space to be able to occupy. So you made this very easy and feel very safe, and I appreciate it. You were doing wonderful work. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. I just want to say, right after my dad passed away, I was invited on a radio program where the people didn't want to know about suicide. They wanted the dirty details behind the scenario, what happened the night that my dad passed away and who did it and how. And this platform is not about that. I'm not about that. That's your private, personal space. And we're not here for that. We're here to talk about the circumstances leading up to healing and helping each other.
Perfect. I love it.
Yes, thank you all so much. And this concludes my 143rd episode of Speaking of Love. I will be back next week. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, love on each other, and have a beautiful day. See you soon. Bye-bye.